When I first heard what my friends were saying about you, I did not stop them. I listened quietly. Some of them spoke with certainty, as if they had already decided who you were without ever sitting beside you or sharing a moment with you. They used confident voices, the kind that makes opinions sound like facts. I trusted them because they were people I had known for a long time. I assumed they saw something I did not. At that time, it felt easier to agree inside my head than to question them. I told myself they were protecting me. I told myself they wanted what was best for me. So I let their words settle in my mind. Slowly, without realizing it, those words shaped the way I looked at you. I began to notice small things and connect them to what I had already been told. If you were quiet, I thought it meant distance. If you took time to respond, I thought it meant you did not care. I was not fair, but I did not know that yet. I believed I was being careful. I believed I was being smart. Looking back, I see how easily other people's opinions can become our own thoughts when we do not stop to ask where they come from. At the beginning, my behavior changed in small ways. I became more reserved around you. I did not share as much. I watched instead of listening. I measured your actions through the lens my friends had given me. It was not something I planned. It happened naturally, quietly, without noise. I remember moments when you tried to explain yourself, and I nodded, but inside I was already judging the explanation before it ended. I was comparing your words to what I had heard, not to what I was seeing. There were days when I went home and repeated your actions in my head, twisting them to fit the story that had already been written for me by others. I never thought about how unfair that was. I never thought about how heavy it must feel to be seen that way by someone who never truly asked. You did not argue. You did not defend yourself loudly. You stayed the same. At that time, I mistook your calm for proof that my friends were right. I thought silence meant guilt. I did not understand that sometimes silence is simply patience. Time passed, and nothing dramatic happened. There were no big confrontations, no emotional scenes, no moments where everything exploded. Instead, there were ordinary days, simple days, days where you showed up the same way again and again. You remembered small things I mentioned once and forgot about. You respected my space without pulling away completely. When I was tired, you did not demand attention. When I spoke, you listened without interrupting. These were not grand gestures. They were quiet actions that did not ask to be noticed. At first I ignored them. I told myself they did not mean much. I said to myself that anyone could do these things, but they kept happening. Over time, it became harder to ignore the pattern. Your behavior did not change based on mood or convenience. It was steady. It was consistent. That consistency started to create small cracks in the story I had believed. I did not admit it to myself right away, but something inside me began to feel uncertain about the judgments I had accepted so easily. There were moments when my friends repeated their opinions, expecting me to agree like before. I noticed how quickly they spoke, how sure they sounded, and for the first time I noticed how little they actually knew. They spoke in general ideas, not real experiences. They talked about what they assumed you might do, not what you had done. I started to feel uncomfortable during those conversations. I still did not argue with them, but I stopped adding my voice. I stopped feeding the story. I began to realize that most of what they believed came from distance, not understanding. Meanwhile, my own experience with you was slowly telling a different story, one written in quiet moments instead of loud opinions. It confused me at first. I wondered if I was missing something obvious. I wondered if I was being naive. But every time I tried to find proof that my friends were right, I came up empty. What I found instead were moments of kindness that did not need recognition, moments of honesty that did not try to impress, moments of patience that asked for nothing in return. I remember one specific day that was not special at all, yet it stayed with me. I was overwhelmed with my own thoughts, carrying worries I did not know how to explain. I was distant, distracted, and clearly not present. You noticed, but you did not push. You did not ask questions that demanded answers. You simply stayed nearby, offering support without words. Later, when I finally spoke, you listened carefully, without turning the conversation back to yourself. That day showed me something important. It showed me that your care was not about control or attention. It was about respect. That realization stayed with me long after the moment passed. It made me think about how wrong it was to reduce a person to a few opinions shared by others. It made me think about how trust is built, not through explanations, but through behavior that remains steady over time. Slowly, my inner voice began to change. Instead of repeating what my friends had said, I started asking myself questions. I asked why I had believed them so quickly. I asked why I had not trusted my own observations. I realized how much easier it is to accept someone else's judgment than to form your own, especially when those people are close to you. It felt uncomfortable to admit that I had been influenced. It felt even more uncomfortable to admit that I had been wrong. But growth rarely feels comfortable. I did not suddenly see you as perfect. That was never the point. I began to see you as real, as human, as someone who deserved to be understood on your own terms. The labels my friends had used no longer fit. They felt shallow and incomplete. They could not explain the person I was slowly getting to know through time and shared experience. As trust grew, it did not arrive loudly. It arrived in silence, in routine, in familiarity. I found myself relaxing around you. I stopped overthinking your words. I stopped searching for hidden meanings. I allowed myself to take things at face value. That shift brought peace I did not expect. I realized how much tension I had been carrying, trying to protect myself from a threat that did not exist. You never asked me to defend you to others. You never asked me to choose sides. That alone spoke volumes. It showed confidence, not arrogance. It showed understanding, not weakness. I began to respect the way you let time speak for you, instead of trying to convince anyone with words. In a world where people rush to explain themselves, your patience stood out in the most quiet way. There came a point when my friends noticed my change. They asked fewer questions, made fewer comments. Some of them seemed surprised. Some seemed unsure. I did not feel the need to explain myself fully. I simply said that people are more complex than they appear from the outside. That answer felt honest enough. Inside, I knew the truth was deeper. The truth was that you had shown me how wrong easy judgments can be. You had shown me that character is revealed slowly, not announced loudly. I started to think about how many times I might have done the same to others, forming opinions without giving them space to show who they really were. That thought stayed with me. It made me more careful, more patient, more willing to listen. Now when I look back, I do not feel anger toward my friends. I understand that they spoke from their own fears, their own experiences, their own limited view. I also do not blame myself the way I once might have. I see that learning often comes through mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize them. You never asked for an apology, but I carry a quiet one inside me. It is not heavy. It is simply honest. It reminds me to slow down, to observe, to let people reveal themselves over time instead of rushing to conclusions. Your actions did not demand trust. They earned it, and because of that, the trust feels real. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know how others will continue to see you, or how opinions might change again with time. What I do know is that my understanding now comes from experience, not noise. It comes from watching how someone treats the world when no one is watching closely. It comes from patience, from consistency, from quiet proof. That kind of understanding does not shout. It does not need approval. It simply exists. And as I move forward, I carry that lesson with me, knowing that sometimes the truth about a person is not found in what people say about them, but in what they show slowly, day after day, when they think no one is keeping score. As time continued to move forward, I noticed how naturally my perspective had shifted, even though I never made a clear decision to change it. It happened quietly, the same way trust had grown. There was no single moment where I said to myself that everything my friends believed was wrong. Instead, there were many small moments that slowly replaced old thoughts with new understanding. I began to notice how comfortable silence felt around you. It was not awkward or heavy. It was calm. That calmness told me more than words ever could. People who pretend often struggle with silence. They try to fill it. You never did. You seemed at ease being exactly who you were, without trying to shape yourself into what others expected. That authenticity made me feel grounded. It made me realize how exhausting it must be to live under constant judgment and still remain kind. I started paying closer attention to how you treated people who could offer you nothing in return. The way you spoke to strangers, the way you listened to people who were often ignored, the way you stayed polite, even when others were careless with their words. None of this was dramatic or noticeable at first glance. It required time to see the pattern, and once I did, it became impossible to unsee. My friends' opinions began to feel distant, like echoes from a place I no longer lived in. They were loud but empty. What I was seeing in front of me was quiet, but full of meaning. I realized that real character often lives in ordinary moments, not in situations where people are trying to impress. There were days when doubt still tried to return. Old habits do not disappear easily. Sometimes a careless comment from someone would make me pause. Sometimes a memory of what I was once told would briefly resurface. But each time that happened, reality gently corrected it. Not through arguments or explanations, but through behavior that stayed true. You did not rush me to trust you completely. You allowed me to move at my own pace. That patience felt rare. It made me feel safe enough to be honest with myself about how wrong I had been to rely on second-hand opinions. Slowly, I began to trust my own judgment again. That felt like reclaiming something I did not realize I had lost. I also noticed changes within myself. I became more careful about how I spoke about others. When conversations turned into gossip, I felt uncomfortable. I started to see how easily words can reduce a human being to a simple story that is often incomplete or unfair. I understood that my friends were not intentionally cruel. They were repeating what they believed, just as I once did. But belief without understanding can be harmful, even when it comes from concern. That realization stayed with me. It softened the way I listened. It slowed the way I judged. I found myself asking more questions and making fewer assumptions. In that way, your presence did not just change how I saw you. It changed how I saw people in general. There were moments when I wanted to tell you everything. I wanted to explain how my thoughts had evolved, how my understanding had deepened. But something held me back. Not fear, but respect. I did not want to turn your patience into a story about my growth alone. You never asked for recognition for the way you handled things. You never asked to be seen as right. You simply lived your truth quietly. I felt that explaining everything might disturb the balance that had formed naturally between us. So I chose to let things remain as they were, steady and uncomplicated. Sometimes the most honest way to show understanding is through changed behavior, not long explanations. As seasons changed and routines shifted, one thing remained consistent. You stayed the same. That consistency became a kind of anchor for me. Life around us moved quickly, filled with noise, opinions, and constant judgment. In that movement, your calm presence felt grounding. I began to see how rare it is to find someone who does not feel the need to constantly prove themselves. You trusted time to do its work. That trust reflected strength, not weakness. It taught me that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected immediately. Some truths reveal themselves only when given enough space. I sometimes wonder how different things might have been if I had questioned my friends from the beginning. Maybe I would have saved myself confusion. Maybe I would have trusted sooner. But I also know that this slow journey taught me something important. It taught me the value of observation. It taught me that trust built slowly tends to be stronger because it is tested quietly along the way. I learned that people are not defined by what others say about them, but by how they show up when no one is watching closely. That lesson stays with me, shaping how I move through the world now. There are still people who see you only through their own assumptions. I notice it in their tone, in the way they keep distance without reason. I no longer feel the urge to correct them. I understand now that understanding cannot be forced. It has to be experienced. Just as I needed time to see the truth, others will need their own time, if they ever choose to look beyond the surface. That acceptance brings peace. It frees me from the need to explain or defend. It allows things to unfold naturally. As I reflect on everything, I realize that what changed was not just my opinion, but my way of listening. I learned to listen with patience, to observe without rushing to conclusions. I learned that trust is not something we demand from others. It is something we allow to grow through consistency and respect. You proved that without ever trying to. And in doing so, you showed me how often we misunderstand people, simply because we do not give them the time they deserve. Now, when I think about the words my friends once said, they feel distant and small. They no longer carry weight. What carries weight are the moments I witnessed myself. The quiet support. The steady presence. The simple honesty. Those things cannot be replaced by opinions or rumors. They stand on their own. They speak clearly, without needing to be loud. And as I continue forward, I carry that understanding with me, open to learning, open to seeing people for who they truly are, knowing that sometimes the most powerful truths are revealed slowly through patience, time, and the courage to look beyond what we are told. As more time passed, the quiet understanding between us continued to deepen in ways I did not expect. It did not feel like progress in the usual sense. There were no milestones to point at, no clear moments to celebrate. Instead, it felt like something steady settling into place, like learning the rhythm of a familiar road after walking it many times. I became aware of how much trust can live in ordinary routines, the way conversations flowed without effort, the way disagreements, when they appeared, stayed gentle and respectful, the way neither of us felt the need to win or dominate a moment. These details mattered more than I once believed. They showed me that real connection does not need intensity to be meaningful. It needs space, honesty, and the freedom to exist without pressure. I noticed how you never tried to reshape yourself to fit into anyone's expectations. You did not try to become softer or louder, faster or slower, just to be accepted. You remained consistent, even when it would have been easier to perform or explain. That consistency slowly erased the remaining doubt in my mind. It taught me that people who know who they are do not feel threatened by misunderstanding. They trust that time will reveal the truth. That lesson stayed with me deeply. It reminded me that clarity does not come from defending yourself again and again, but from living in alignment with your values. There were moments when I caught myself thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had held on more tightly to what my friends said, I might have missed all of this. I might have walked away too early, believing a version of you that was never real. That thought humbled me. It made me aware of how fragile understanding can be, and how quickly it can be lost when we rely too much on borrowed opinions. I started to feel grateful for the time that allowed truth to surface naturally. Not everyone gets that chance. Not everyone is patient enough to wait for quiet proof. I also became more aware of how judgment often says more about the person judging than the person being judged. My friends' words were shaped by their own experiences, their own disappointments, their own fears. They were not seeing you. They were seeing shadows of past situations that had nothing to do with you. Understanding that did not make me angry. It made me more compassionate. It helped me see how easy it is to project our history onto someone new. That awareness changed the way I listened to others. I learned to separate concern from assumption, advice from control. I learned to pause before accepting someone else's certainty as truth. As this awareness grew, my inner world became quieter. I stopped feeling the need to analyze every interaction. I stopped searching for hidden meanings. I allowed things to be simple. That simplicity brought a sense of relief I did not know I needed. It felt like laying down a heavy bag I had been carrying without realizing it. Being around you no longer felt like something I had to manage or evaluate. It felt natural. That naturalness was its own kind of reassurance. It told me that trust had found its place without being forced. Sometimes I think about how trust is often misunderstood. Many people believe it arrives all at once, through a single promise or a strong declaration. What I learned instead is that trust is built in layers. It forms when actions match words consistently over time. It grows when people respect boundaries without resentment. It strengthens when silence is allowed to exist without being filled with suspicion. You showed me all of this without ever teaching it directly. You simply lived it. That made the lesson real. There were moments when I saw you misunderstood by others, and I felt a quiet sadness. Not because I felt the need to correct them, but because I recognized how lonely it can be to be seen through the wrong lens. At the same time, I noticed how you did not let that misunderstanding change you. You did not grow bitter. You did not close yourself off. You stayed open, steady, and grounded. That resilience impressed me more than any explanation could have. It showed strength without hardness, confidence without pride. It reminded me that staying true to yourself in the face of judgment is one of the hardest things a person can do. As I continued to observe, I realized that the proof my friends demanded was never something dramatic. They were waiting for something to go wrong, for a mistake big enough to confirm their beliefs. But life rarely works that way. People reveal themselves through patterns, not single moments. Over time, your pattern remained clear. It was made of respect, patience, and quiet reliability. That pattern spoke louder than any rumor. It taught me to trust what I see repeated, not what I hear once. I also reflected on my own responsibility in all of this. I understood that by listening without questioning, I had played a role in allowing those judgments to influence me. Accepting that truth was not easy, but it was necessary. It reminded me that growth often begins with honesty about our own choices. I forgave myself not by forgetting what happened, but by learning from it. I promised myself to be more present in my own experiences, to rely less on the noise around me, and more on what unfolds in front of my eyes. With time, the connection between us settled into something calm and dependable. It did not need labels or explanations. It existed quietly, shaped by shared understanding rather than shared defense. I noticed how little we needed to say to feel understood. That kind of connection does not happen quickly. It forms when people allow each other to be fully human, without pressure to perform or impress. It felt rare and grounding. It reminded me that the best connections are often the least dramatic. Now, when I look at the journey as a whole, I see how important patience was in every step. Patience with myself as I unlearned old beliefs. Patience with others as they remained stuck in their assumptions. Patience with time as it slowly revealed what words could not. That patience changed me. It softened my judgments. It expanded my understanding. It taught me that truth does not rush. It arrives when it is ready, carried by consistency and quiet integrity. I do not know how this story will continue. I do not know how circumstances might change or how people's opinions might shift again. What I do know is that I trust my ability to see clearly now. I trust what time has shown me. I trust the lessons learned through observation rather than assumption. And as I move forward, I carry this experience with me as a reminder that sometimes the most important truths are not spoken loudly. They are lived patiently, revealed slowly, and understood only when we are willing to look beyond what everyone else is saying and pay attention to what is quietly, steadily, and honestly unfolding in front of us. As life kept moving, I began to understand that what had changed inside me was not only about you, but about how I now experienced the world. I noticed that I no longer rushed to fill gaps with assumptions. When something was unclear, I allowed it to stay unclear. That alone felt like growth. Before, uncertainty made me uncomfortable, so I borrowed other people's certainty. Now, I learned to sit with not knowing everything right away. Being around you helped me learn that. You never rushed clarity. You allowed things to unfold in their own time. Watching that taught me that patience is not passive. It is an active choice to trust the process, even when others are impatient or loud. I started remembering small moments that once felt unimportant, but now carried meaning. The way you showed up when plans changed unexpectedly. The way you stayed calm when situations became slightly uncomfortable. The way you respected my opinions even when they differed from yours. None of these moments demanded attention. They simply existed. Over time, those moments formed a quiet record of who you were. It was a record built on behavior, not explanation. And that record felt honest. I realized how rare it is to find someone whose actions stay aligned no matter who is watching. That realization deepened my respect in a way words never could. There were days when I thought about how easily misunderstandings can shape entire relationships. One comment, one opinion, one warning passed from one person to another can grow into a wall that never needed to exist. I saw how close I came to building that wall myself. That thought stayed with me. It made me more careful, not just with others but with myself. I learned to question the stories I tell in my own head. I learned to ask where they come from, and whether they truly belong to me. This self-awareness did not arrive suddenly. It grew slowly, just like trust did. Sometimes, I noticed how people around us expected some kind of shift from you. They waited for you to change, to react, to respond differently as time passed. When that did not happen, they seemed confused. I saw that confusion clearly. It came from the belief that everyone eventually reveals something negative if you wait long enough. Watching you remain steady challenged that belief. It reminded me that consistency is not boring. It is reassuring. It is grounding. It is proof that not everyone is hiding something waiting to be exposed. I also noticed how my own language changed when I spoke about you. At first I avoided talking much at all. Later I spoke with more ease, not to defend, but to describe honestly. I did not exaggerate. I did not minimize. I simply spoke from experience. That felt freeing. It felt like stepping out of a role I never chose to play. I realized how heavy it can be to carry other people's expectations and fears. Letting go of that weight allowed me to breathe more easily. It allowed the connection to exist without tension. There were moments when I wondered if you ever noticed this shift in me. If you sensed the quiet change in the way I listened, the way I trusted, the way I showed up. You never pointed it out. You never questioned it. You simply accepted it. That acceptance felt gentle and respectful. It showed me that you did not need acknowledgement for your patience. You were not waiting for validation. You were simply being yourself. That realization strengthened the trust even further. It made me feel safe in a way that did not need reassurance. As months passed, I found myself thinking less about the past judgments and more about the present reality. The old voices faded naturally. They were replaced by lived experience. That transition did not require effort. It happened because truth tends to settle quietly when given enough time. I noticed that I smiled more easily. I felt less guarded. I allowed moments to be light without questioning them. That sense of ease was something I had not expected. It reminded me that misunderstanding creates tension, and understanding creates space. Space to breathe. Space to be human. I also became more aware of how often people confuse intensity with sincerity. Loud emotions, strong opinions, dramatic reactions are often mistaken for honesty. What I learned instead is that sincerity can be quiet. It can exist without performance. You showed that through your steady presence. You did not try to convince anyone. You did not try to appear perfect. You allowed yourself to be seen over time. That approach felt honest. It felt real. It taught me that truth does not need decoration. There were moments when life tested patience, moments when circumstances were not easy or clear. During those times, I noticed how you handled uncertainty. You did not blame. You did not withdraw. You stayed present. That presence mattered. It showed reliability without control. It showed care without pressure. Those moments became part of the quiet proof that continued to replace every old assumption. I understood then that trust is not built when everything is smooth. It is built when people remain steady during uncertainty. I started to apply this understanding to other areas of my life. I became slower to judge. I became more open to listening. I gave people time to show who they were instead of deciding too early. That shift changed my relationships in subtle ways. Conversations became deeper. Conflicts became softer. I realized that patience does not weaken connection. It strengthens it. This lesson stayed with me because it was not learned through advice. It was learned through experience. There were times when I thought about telling my friends everything I had learned. Not to prove them wrong, but to share the understanding I gained. But I realized that understanding cannot be transferred that way. It has to be lived. Just as I needed time and experience, they would need the same. Accepting that brought peace. It freed me from the need to convince. It allowed everyone to move at their own pace. As the connection continued, it remained grounded and real. It did not demand certainty about the future. It did not promise answers to every question. It existed in the present, shaped by mutual respect and quiet trust. That felt enough. It reminded me that not everything meaningful needs definition or direction right away. Some things are allowed to exist simply as they are. Looking back now, I see that what truly changed was my relationship with judgment. I learned that quick conclusions often come from fear, not wisdom. I learned that patience is a form of courage. I learned that people deserve the chance to be known directly, not through borrowed stories. These lessons did not arrive through confrontation or drama. They arrived through observation, time, and consistency. As I continue forward, I carry this understanding with me. I remain open, knowing that people are complex and layered. I remain patient, knowing that truth reveals itself slowly. I remain thoughtful, knowing how easily misunderstandings can grow when we stop listening. I do not claim to have all the answers. I only know that what I have seen with my own eyes matters more than what I once heard. As I kept moving through life with this new awareness, I began to notice how deeply the habit of judgment is woven into everyday conversations. People often speak quickly, labeling situations and individuals without realizing how little they truly know. I noticed it at work, in casual talks, even in passing comments from strangers. Before, I would have absorbed those opinions without much thought. Now, I paused. I listened differently. I noticed how stories change depending on who is telling them. That awareness made me quieter, not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted my words to come from understanding rather than assumption. This shift did not make me distant. Instead, it made my connections feel more honest and intentional. I realized that patience is not only about waiting for others to show who they are. It is also about allowing ourselves to grow without rushing into conclusions about our own feelings. There were moments when I reflected on my past reactions and felt a sense of regret. Not guilt that weighed me down, but a gentle regret that reminded me I was still learning. I accepted that growth often comes with these quiet realizations. You played a role in that growth without ever trying to guide or influence me. Your presence was enough. That taught me that sometimes the strongest lessons are not taught intentionally. They are learned through observation and experience. I began to appreciate how trust reshapes the way we experience time. When doubt is present, every moment feels tense and uncertain. When trust grows, time feels softer. Days pass without constant evaluation. Interactions feel lighter. That shift was subtle but powerful. I noticed how much energy I had once spent analyzing small details, searching for meaning where none was needed. Letting go of that habit created space in my mind. Space for curiosity, space for calm, space for genuine connection. I did not realize how heavy constant judgment had been until it was gone. There were moments when I observed how you handled situations where misunderstanding could easily have turned into frustration. Instead of reacting defensively, you chose clarity through calm action. You explained only when necessary and stepped back when explanation was not useful. That balance impressed me. It showed emotional awareness without emotional distance. It showed care without control. Watching that taught me that not every misunderstanding requires correction. Some resolve themselves naturally when given time and consistency. I also noticed how you treated yourself. You did not apologize for who you were. You did not over-explain your choices. You did not shrink yourself to make others comfortable. That quiet confidence stood out. It showed self-respect without arrogance. It reminded me that people who are secure in themselves do not need to convince others of their worth. They let their lives speak. That realization stayed with me. It changed the way I thought about self-worth and validation. I began to rely less on external approval and more on inner clarity. As time went on, the connection between us continued without pressure. It did not demand constant attention or reassurance. It allowed distance when needed and closeness when natural. That balance felt healthy. It taught me that trust does not mean constant presence. It means confidence in the connection even when space exists. That understanding deepened my sense of security. It allowed me to be myself without fear of misunderstanding. I started to see how often fear disguises itself as concern. Many of the opinions my friends once shared came from their desire to protect me. But protection built on assumption can become limitation. Real protection comes from understanding and awareness, not restriction. That realization softened my view of them. I did not see them as wrong or right. I saw them as human, shaped by their own experiences. This understanding allowed me to hold compassion without surrendering my own perspective. There were days when I thought about how easily trust can be broken, when people rely more on words than actions. I realized how fortunate I was to witness consistency over time. Not everyone gets that chance. Many relationships end before truth has time to surface. This thought made me value patience even more. It reminded me that rushing decisions often leads to incomplete understanding. Slowing down allows reality to reveal itself naturally. I noticed that my emotional responses became more balanced. I reacted less and reflected more. When something felt unclear, I allowed myself to sit with it instead of seeking immediate answers. That ability brought peace. It showed me that not every feeling needs to be resolved instantly. Some need time to settle. You modeled that approach without ever naming it. Your calm response to uncertainty taught me more than any advice could have. As seasons changed again, I realized that trust had become a quiet foundation rather than an active thought. I no longer measured interactions or questioned intentions. I simply experienced them. That shift felt liberating. It allowed joy to exist without suspicion. It allowed moments to be appreciated without analysis. I understood then that trust, once established, does not need constant attention. It works silently in the background, supporting connection without demanding focus. I also became more aware of how society often rewards loudness over sincerity. People who speak confidently are believed more easily than those who act consistently. This realization made me question many assumptions I had accepted in the past. I learned to look beyond presentation and focus on behavior. That shift changed how I chose who to listen to. I valued depth over volume, patience over urgency, consistency over charm. There were moments when I felt gratitude for the way things unfolded, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Imperfections existed, but they were handled with honesty and respect. That felt meaningful. It showed me that trust does not require perfection. It requires willingness to remain steady even when things are not easy. I noticed how my sense of safety grew. Not the kind that depends on control or certainty, but the kind that comes from understanding. I felt safe knowing that misunderstanding would not automatically lead to conflict. I felt safe knowing that silence did not mean distance. I felt safe knowing that patience was valued. That sense of safety allowed me to be more open, more relaxed, more present. As time continued, I reflected on how much this experience changed my internal dialogue. I spoke to myself with more kindness. I judged my own mistakes less harshly. I allowed myself to learn without shame. That internal shift mirrored the external trust I experienced. It showed me that the way we treat others often reflects how we treat ourselves. Learning patience with others helped me learn patience with myself. I became more comfortable with uncertainty about the future. I no longer felt the need to define outcomes or predict what would happen next. I accepted that not everything needs a clear direction right away. Some things unfold best when allowed to grow naturally. This acceptance brought a sense of calm that stayed with me. It reminded me that control is often an illusion and trust is a choice. There were times when I thought about how easily this story could have ended differently. A single decision, a single assumption, could have closed the door too early. That thought made me careful with future choices. It reminded me to slow down when forming opinions. It reminded me to listen longer than I speak. It reminded me to value lived experience over borrowed narratives. As the connection continued quietly, it remained free from expectations and demands. It existed in mutual respect and understanding. That simplicity felt rare and valuable. It showed me that meaningful connections do not need constant validation. They need honesty, patience, and space to grow. Looking ahead, I do not pretend to know what will come next. Life changes. People change. Circumstances shift. What I carry forward is not certainty but clarity. Clarity about the importance of seeing people directly. Clarity about the power of consistency. Clarity about the value of patience. These lessons stay with me, shaping how I move through the world.